July 4. I'll call to order the Fiscal Subcommittee of the Warwick School Committee. We'll begin with a roll call. Superintendent Danbrook.
Here.
Assistant Superintendent Bill McCaffrey.
Here.
Director of Finance, Mr. Bowl.
Here.
Director of IT, Dr. Taylor.
Here.
Mr. Raymel White.
Here.
Mr. Chris Mark, absent, and I am present. We'll go into the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
On to new business. First item, Mr. Bowl, discussion update 2024 financial performance versus FY24 budget.
So just at a high level in terms of the budget update, expenses are looking relatively on track compared to the fiscal year 24 budget. The bigger ticket items like transportation were pretty much on budget. Out of district tuitions were on budget. So those items I'm comfortable with. Healthcare, we're running at a sizable surplus. So again, good things there. One of the things that we need to nail down before we start discussing whether or not we're in a surplus or deficit situation is the payroll. So at fiscal year 23, our salary expense was $95.78 million. And in fiscal year 24, we only budgeted $95.37 million. So we actually budgeted less in fiscal year 24 than we did in fiscal year, than we expensed in fiscal year 23, despite the fact that we had raises and some additional hires. So there is some concern that we're going to be pretty materially over the salary budget. So we're trying to figure out what that number is before sort of like further expounding on whether or not we're in a surplus or a deficit position. So
When do we anticipate having those figures?
I got an estimate for payroll today that I've yet to review. Because we just ran 6:30 draft financials for the first time on Monday. So I'm going to take a look through that payroll projection, and then I could even have an update at the school committee meeting. It's not on the agenda right now. But we'll just continue to talk through it, like the next fiscal subcommittee meeting, the next school committee meeting. But within the next month, we should absolutely have like a more accurate figure there.
Yeah, because I believe we were initially speaking that funds that we identify as surplus, we would also try to pull ahead from the upcoming fiscal budget to compound the funds that we were going to receive from the mayor or additional state aid for vets.
Can you explain that a little further?
We were looking at what we needed to do for vets in terms of upgrades to that facility, and before knowing where additional funds were going to come, I believe there was some discussion that any surplus identified, we would try to get a little bit of a head start on it here in FY24, and then whatever we got in FY25 would have been just compounded on top.
Right. So fiscal year 23, we still have, actually fiscal year 22 and fiscal year 23, we ran a surplus in both years. Fiscal year 22 was very small. It was $20,000 or something like that. Fiscal year 23, we had a $685,000 surplus. So those funds continue to roll forward till we decide what to do with them because they're unrestricted. So fiscal year 24 right now is obviously what we're working on closing. So that's the question mark, is like, what does fiscal year 24 look like? And again, I think the salary, not just salary, but payroll and benefits figure is still a little bit up in the air because we continue to pay teachers, not just teachers, but we continue to pay staff throughout the summer. Even though it's for fiscal year 24 expenses, and we're just trying to get like the most accurate projection of what that remaining expense is before making any sort of like pronouncement about it.
Okay. As far as anything else with the current financial performance to the budget?
No, it's really just that salary line is the most concerning thing. Everything else seems to be relatively in line with the fiscal year 24 budget. Or at least in some circumstances in a pretty material surplus position. It's really just salaries.
Well, nicely done to you, the superintendent, the rest of the administration, because I know at the beginning of the year, we were spending money very quickly. It seemed like a lot of expenses hit at the very start of the year.
Yep.
And I was concerned because I think we were like at 45% of our budget only through 4 months of the fiscal year. So
Yeah.
nicely done with controlling costs from that point forward.
Yep.
And then all of course, our weather-related issues at the facilities and everything else that was unexpected. So.
Yep.
Anybody have anything else, members from the committee for Mr. Bowl? I believe you kind of touched on the FY24 budget surplus allocations. I don't think we should probably go into that until you have the final figure.
Yeah.
And then what you guys are thinking of doing with the surplus funds.
Yep.
Is anyone opposed to that, or do they think that we?
Yeah, we should table that until we know, or have a better idea of what the year end looks like.
Okay, you good with tabling it? When we decided we would table FY24 budget surplus allocations based on Brandon's explanation.
Yeah.
Any, you disagree or agree?
No, I agree. We need more
Okay,
information.
cool. So then discussion update, transportation contract status update, Mr. McCaffrey.
Sure, the first student contract, financially, we're in a good place where we've agreed to terms for the most part. When it comes to language, there's one area where we're still trying to address regarding liquidating damages. We received language from our attorney, had it reviewed, sent it back to them 4 days ago to Richard, and today, we hadn't heard back from Richard. I did speak with Bill Roach, who's Richard's supervisor today, and I did mention that, we have a lot of the language is in good shape. Our concern is the liquidating damages component, which we had reviewed by our attorney. And that's really the only outstanding piece necessary to finalize that contract to forward to school committee for final approval. So he did say today that he would follow up with Richard. And I did confirm with Brendan just about 5 minutes ago that he still hasn't heard back from Richard to this point.
Still, yeah, no response.
If they can tighten it up by tomorrow at some point and get it in the hands of,
Yeah.
we can even call it, for the next meeting.
Yeah.
Come up here in July.
That's the hope if possible.
Yeah.
Also, the second piece to transportation, we had a suggestion that we put the statewide component out to bid. At this point, we have a draft RFP that we put together. We're going to finalize compiling all the information in the next week and a half, and then put that out so we can at least get a hard number for statewide transportation piece, which is a substantial amount of money in the transportation budget. Our hope is to have that out by a week and a half out.
That's for the out of district students.
Out of district students.
Yes.
Is the legislation on that they pick statewide?
We can opt out of statewide. We have the ability, we have in
We can.
a few circumstances this year to have some efficiencies in the transportation budget. And we feel that if we put it all out at one big package, maybe we'll get even more efficiencies.
So we're moving forward with that, with like Durham, Ocean State and others.
Once it's finalized, we'll look at all transportation vendors that are available to support that.
Yeah, and I believe Cranston, who has their own transportation department, actually opted to outsource their statewide routes this year. So I think we're doing the right thing.
Absolutely.
Right. Going out to bid separately from our in-district tuition or in-district transportation.
This is the topic of transportation was not felt necessary to bring up this time.
No, that's awesome to hear, because, there is the cost there, and if we can decrease it, that'll be good for the district.
Yeah.
All right, discussion update. I apologizing for members of the public who go on to watch us later on the agenda. Had myself listing it as the presenter, but it would be better coming from Mr. Bowl or the superintendent. And that is discussion update, recommended allocation of additional state aid.
Yeah, so our state aid number that was enacted came in about $1.36 million higher than what we had originally planned for. So our final version of the school committee budget included $500,000 of that increase. So there's about $836,000 that's unbudgeted, we'll say. So one of the biggest needs, I think, in the district right now for those funds are the capital improvements to the green building next door. So we did budget $250,000 for capital improvements specifically for that project through the regular budget process, knowing that we would need additional funds to complete the project. The director of capital projects, Mr. Gothberg, believes that the project is going to cost somewhere between $500,000 and $600,000. So conservatively, I think we're going to need to allocate at least $350,000 of the additional state aid we received to that project. So that leaves call it $450,000 to $500,000 left. In state aid that's unbudgeted.
Not to interrupt you, in the FY24 budget, we started spending money on that.
Not on capital improvements to the building. Not that I can recall. It's been a conversation for a long time, which is probably why it seems like we spent funds on it in fiscal year 24, but we only just started that work maybe last week.
And I think any work that was done by our guys. So,
Yeah. So there was some demolition work done that was done by WISE employees. The actual design and construction work that's going to happen from outside vendors is just starting. So that's, I mean, to me, that's the largest piece. There's like $350,000 that needs to be earmarked for that project. It leaves about $500,000, maybe a little bit less. That still is not budgeted for. Those aren't significant funds. I think it should just sort of be managed on a as needs basis because we have things like the HVAC at vets where it comes up sporadically where we need $100,000 for a repair or something in a building. And we're not in the same position we were in for the past 3 or so years where we could say we have these extra grant funds that we can put towards it and then just worry about it later. I think we need to be a little bit more cautious in the way that we allocate funds going forward for the time being. And so my recommendation is just to leave that additional state aid as is, with the exception of those funds that are needed for the improvements to green. And as needs arise, we can have discussions on whether or not to touch it.
Any comments, thoughts from members of the committee?
I just think we wanted Kevin to have, availability to make repairs and we don't know what's coming up. So just to keep some aside for him.
Nope, that works. My only ask would be, I have two asks. Actually, two asks and a question. The first question would be, where would that additional state aid be stored within the budget? So that way, when we're seeing transfers, and I would like it identified when there's a purchase rack, when it comes before a full committee, so that way we know what we're drawing down from.
Yeah.
Versus it just being like out there.
Yep.
So where would that?
So in the, how like on our monthly school committee meeting, like fiscal report, we've got the budget column, we've got the actual column. So the budgeted column right now in the July school committee fiscal report shows what school committee approved. In the actuals column, I'll just update the state aid number to be what we're actually receiving from the state, so that you can compare. Because anything coming from state aid or the city in terms of dollars, we don't necessarily differentiate in the accounting system.
So what bucket would we, what bucket would that be within?
What do you mean?
Like what UCOA code would we be?
So it'll just be general fund. It's all general funds. So that's what I mean when I say we don't differentiate between like city funds versus state aid.
Yeah.
So honestly, it's just a matter of like watching it on the side. I don't know if that's like the ideal response, but having like a spreadsheet so that we're tracking the $850,000 that we do have unbudgeted for.
Yeah.
And just, I could even provide it as like part of my update monthly at school committee to show like of the additional state aid we didn't initially budget for, this is what's been spent, just so we can track it.
And I don't know if it helps, and I don't know if it helps your question, but I know when we present the school committee documents each month, we're very clear that it's a budgeted expense out of fiscal year 25 or a grant funded expense. Maybe that's where we would also highlight the fact that this was not a budgeted expense. However, this is being funded out of this, so that way.
And that would be
Red
the
flag for your documentation on the memo. So I don't know if that helps address what you're thinking.
That would be nice, just so that way, because I don't want to sit up there and keep going, like, yeah, go ahead, approve that expense, approve it, and then at what point, am I on the hook or the rest of the committee, where it's like, well, did anyone keep an eye on it, you know what I mean, and we just kept throwing money, because the vets matter, just speaking for myself, not for the rest of the full committee, the HVAC, we've got to figure it out, versus just pumping up 100,000 in, and I don't think we can go back to the city council and ask for a $25 million bond for a system that's only 8 years old, so.
So there'd be revenue, general funds, and then the expenditure area, would it sit in a certain expenditure area?
No, just whatever the expense is for. It's not, there's no differentiation between whether an expense was paid for using like city funds or state funds. There is if it's a grant expense, but there's no difference between.
But I think to the transfer question, let's say if I were to need a program I didn't identify through the budget process, it's a 57311 budget code. It's not in my budget, but we have conversations and superintendent, we said they approve that that's a necessary item, then there would be a transfer that would be made into the 57311 account just to be able to have the funds there. So that's another place you'd see, to your point, where you see the transfers each month, you'd see that and it would jive with the memo.
Yeah, because I'm throwing out a hypothetical, let's say at year's end, we have a $600,000 deficit. Well, the $1 million question, the first one, and rightfully so, would be, we started out the year with an $800,000, head start. Because we didn't plan for it.
Right.
And so how can we make sure that everything's net at the end of the year, and we're not going back before the council and saying we ran a little bit of a deficit? I'm trying to have us figure out how we can avoid an embarrassing situation, but it sounds like we have some ideas or recommendations, and however we can do that. That would be
my line of thinking is exactly the same too. I don't want to run an $800,000 deficit if we have, like you said, like an $800,000 head start.
Yeah.
It comes off as looking careless. So
yes.
We'll combine some of those operational things, just that we're tracking that money specifically.
So I added this as an agenda item for the July school committee meeting.
Okay.
My rationale behind that was the school committee is, two powers, right? The biggest powers, policy and budget. And if you think about it, if we pass our budget in April, and then in May, the city passes the overall budget, and then June, the state, well, now any additional state aid, the school committee hasn't endorsed it, or like the spend or whatever the expenses are added to. So I put it on there, certainly put forward your recommendation, or that would be the superintendent's recommendation. But, for me, of that additional money, yes, we should have some reserves there for buildings and ops to draw down for unexpected, I'll call them utility failures or building failures. But definitely want to see a hire for women for security and safety, similar to a Mike Higgins. I would support the recommendation of having a savings account, whatever we want to call it. Reserving a majority of those funds with that hire. And the other thing is, I'd really like for us to get I believe Steve already has the cost, those tennis courts over at Vets finally addressed. If we can use funds from there, I think it's important. I see that there's a big uptick, not only outside of our community, but within the schools itself. They have a pretty good tennis club over there. They run big tournaments. There's a student teacher tournament that individual over there has been running. And again, that's when the facilities start to be built, the athletic facilities on those existing properties, those will be our tennis courts. So, and I just think, you've done a great job forecasting for us. And we see that things are going to be a little bit more difficult in the years to come.
Yep.
So where we can capitalize now, I'd like us to capitalize. So those would be two things that I definitely would want to see us do with those additional funds. As far as everything else, you and the superintendent's recommendation, I would 100% support if we have funds allocated for those two other things.
Okay. I think it's good to discuss that stuff at school committee too, not just here, obviously.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, no, I just, for the, Mr. Testa, for the public's edification, what was the additional funds we received? What are you guys thinking? Because, it's a partnership as well. What do you guys want to do with the additional money? The recommendation from the administration is let's sock some of it away. Absolutely, let's do that. But also let's take advantage of it. And we definitely have a need on the other side of the city for someone in the safety and security position. And that's going to be my stance. Either we get an SRO, which we know Warwick Police is short-staffed right now. But if we don't get the SRO, then I would want to see a body in that school.
Now, does it make sense logistically, just so that way we're ready for the start of the school year, that Teresa would put on the school committee agenda for July, the recommended action to add the unbudgeted position of this, so that way they can hire it, and then the appointment happens in August, so they're here for the start of the school
It's a good
year.
recommendation.
If we wait until August, then we won't necessarily be able to hire and appoint as quick as we should.
We'll have to post it and then it's.
Correct, yeah, but before we even post
Yeah,
it, we need the
yeah.
blessing from the school committee, because it's an unbudgeted position.
Or you'd say
Well, it would be
anticipated.
budgeted once the budget's amended and approved
Correct.
in July. It would be in the budget at that point.
So for that approval, we'd have to list that FTE in the staffing side.
Yeah, but it would be approved in the budget, so you could move forward at that point. Just like every other teaching position is.
We move forward, we post it, we interview, and then we hire. We can bring it to you in August.
Yeah, that, whatever works for you guys to have someone there when you kick off, the 24 to 25 school year. Any, other comments, concerns on that? No? Great. Discussion update, work vets, middle school complex upgrades, cost and funding availability. I'll touch on it just briefly, but then I'll turn it over to whoever wants to speak about the meetings that we had with the mayor. So city council was gracious enough to provide us an additional $500,000. They did not put that within the school department's budget. It was placed within Parks and Rec, DPW. And DPW was to then work closely with the school department to upgrade our outdoor facilities at the middle school there in anticipation of increased wear and tear when the construction of the new high schools begin. We met with the mayor to go over that last Friday, June 28th. There were two separate meetings that were held, one at 9 a.m. and then one at 12 p.m. And the consensus at the conclusion was that we would be able to use as much of that 500,000 that we needed to address the track and field of the football complex. Is that correct?
Yep.
And that remaining funds, the mayor has intentions to use at a different complex within the city.
Yes.
The project will be managed by our director of capital and construction, and the invoices will be provided to the city for payment and processing. Am I missing anything? Any other additional commentary?
They were gracious during the meeting and looked to sort of expedite the process where we already had a proposal in front of us and we worked with their purchasing coordinator at the meeting at 12 o'clock to basically get everything in line and get it paid so that we can start the project. So thank you to the city for prioritizing.
Absolutely. And so that matter now will be going before the city council on July 15th, with them exercising a big exemption.
Mhm.
Any other comments, questions, concerns? All right, seeing none. The last item I have is for this group. Really trying to, if we look at the school committee agenda for the month of July, I'm going to test it out. We have about 50 items, of which I think like 35 or 40 are all purchase recs. So taking Dr. Taylor's idea from a couple meetings prior, Teresa then, or Ms. Tedeschi, then turning them into a couple folders. So there would be the grant funded, and there would be the grant or bond funded folder. There would be the budgeted expense folder, and then there would be the folder for variance to budgeted cost. And those three folders, what we'd be looking for would then be on the memo, or this is what I'm suggesting. Tell me how we can continue to massage this. Would be on the bottom of the purchase rec. It would indicate one of those three items. So it would state but kind of what you're already doing right now. But that way, when Teresa opens it up, she can see it right away and slide it over. And then when we're looking at it, for the public's benefit, if there's a grant funded item, and it's a 1 year grant funded item, there's no additional expense down the road to the school department. Doesn't make sense for us to sit there and talk about it for 3 to 4 minutes if the school department feels it's necessary. It's grant funded, and it's great that we get that memo and the public has access to that memo so they can make themselves aware. But this would kind of mirror to some extent the city council. And then even we can get to a point where we're looking at and critiquing the memos when they're coming in and preparing them for full committee. You guys have any thoughts? Do you, from a optics standpoint, do you see there being any issues with that? Like people being concerned about transparency? Do you think the current way of reading each one off individually works? Or do you think we beta test it in this upcoming July meeting where we call the packets?
I would try.
I would too.
Try something new with this July meeting. But it worked well the last meeting. It was successful. I think we move forward and continue on that path.
Yeah, I think last meeting was a good test, as Mr. McCaffrey said, because that's what we did with all the tech recs.
Yep.
And it seemed like the committee was all right by taking them in mass. So I think that worked well. Saved a lot of time, but the information was transparent to everybody to see.
From a public perspective, representing the community, do you see any issue with that versus what we're currently doing where they're reading off the memo and stating what the expense is for? Or do you think it's fine on taking all of them and, voting on one packet of 10 purchase recs?
Personally,
If the information still is available online prior to the meeting to the public,
I will vote.
vote as a packet? Okay.
And you always offer to someone to pull something out that they want to discuss.
Okay, great. Anything else that we should add to that process to streamline it, make it easier for the business office, make it easier for Ms. Tedeschi, make it easier on the submitters? Anything?
I think it's not even like a big, it's more for budget managers, but it's like putting the memos together. It's no extra work or anything for my office, for the business office. I think this is a good way to streamline it.
Great. With that, any members of the public looking to comment? All right, seeing none, I'd be looking for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Motion made by Dr. Taylor, seconded by Mr. McCaffrey. We are adjourned. All those in favor?
Aye.
We are now adjourned.